everyone, this is CJ with Cycletron. Well, today I want to talk about having to fire people or even being fired yourself. I've owned my own company for a number of years now, and before that I would start and run offices for other people. And when you're in a situation where either you have a small company or a new and growing office for another company, there's just no room for people who have bad attitudes or just poor or underperforming for a variety of reasons. There's just no room for it. Now you give those folks a chance to improve. Now you give those people a chance to improve, and you try and work with them, you try and be patient, but you know, if they got a bad attitude, or you know, I've had to fire people who were stealing or would commit professional fraud. I had a guy one time who misrepresented something of a technical and important matter, and he was the most popular guy in the office. It was essentially, he made a mistake on one job and made the same mistake on the second job after he had been told not to do that. And when he realized he made the same mistake on the second job, he wrote the report as if it was still the first job and submitted it to us for review. And so I caught it, and the guy just was lying about everything. So he was the most popular guy in the office, and I called my boss, who's the owner of the company, to kind of explain what happened and that I needed to fire him. There's just no path forward under those circumstances. And I was shocked when my boss got all weak-kneed and was like, oh, everybody needs a second chance and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, are you kidding me? I thought I was in a parallel universe. So I insisted that we had to fire him. And then, which I did. And then I had people come up to me and said, hey, I know you only fired him because the boss made you do it. I'm like, no, it was my call. I wanted him fired. I said, my only regret is I could only fire him once. So people were shocked by that, but that's just something I couldn't tolerate. So what got me thinking about all this is I've got a guy that I've got to fire right now. And it's stressful having to fire people. It's not something I like to do, but if you find yourself with somebody that is just not going to work out, you got to do it. You're doing a disservice to yourself as a manager or owner of a company and the other workers to keep somebody that just can't cut it. And because of the economy right now and the shortage of good qualified people for a number of jobs, companies have been reluctant to fire people that would otherwise have been fired much sooner. And it's a frustrating thing, but it's sort of like the situation with forest fires. You know, U.S. Park Service, say up in Yellowstone, they put out every little brush fire, and then so much undergrowth built up that when they had a fire that they couldn't control, it pretty much just burned down Yellowstone. They would have been better off letting some of the dead wood and underbrush get cleared out by periodic small fires. So I feel the same way about underperforming people. Now, because of that, I've had to fire lots of people, unfortunately. One time I had somebody that I fired who refused to do their job, and we were in a critical situation. He didn't think I would dare do it because he had been there for 25 years, and it was a pretty outrageous situation. I'm like, either you go do your job or it's not going to work out well. And he doubled down, so I fired him. And I run into him at Best Buy, ordered a line to buy something. That was kind of awkward. was fired once in my life, and professionally, is the best thing that ever happened to me. I was fired because I called out my boss because he lied to me about something that was really important in terms of offering me the opportunity to buy into the company. And when I realized he bait and switched me, I called him on it. And he said, well, either you change your mind about this or we're going to do something else. And the something else was what they call constructive discharge. They were going to try and make my life so miserable that I would quit. And that didn't work. I made them fire me. So as I was saying, I had my boss and the operations manager come to the city where I ran their office, and over a 2 or 3 day period they tried to make life miserable for me so I would quit, which I wouldn't do. I made them fire me. And during those negotiations, as it really should have been called, if there was something I didn't like or I had a question, I'd say, I gotta call my attorney. So I'd duck out and call my attorney. So at the end of all that, I negotiated a severance in exchange for not working for anybody else for a few months. They thought I was gonna take the whole office with me, which was ironic. But anyway, it all worked out. It was the best thing that ever happened to me professionally. It was the basis for starting my own company. So it worked out very well for me. I think it worked out well for them because they wanted yes people. And that's what they got after I was gone. So good for them. But the operations manager, he was actually a cool guy. I really liked him. He was just basically doing what he was told to do. I remember I was packing up my office and he was told to watch me while I packed my stuff. And he was cool about it. Wasn't bird dogging me or anything. And he kind of casually asked, you know, if I had any plans. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I really didn't expect for this to happen. And he's like, you'll land on your feet. And he was right. A different conversation I had with him under different circumstances. He used to work for a lot of big companies, and he was in a position where he had to fire people quite often. And he said a lot of times the women would start crying in his office, and it wouldn't faze him. He would just slowly reach for a box of tissues and say, hey, would you like a tissue? Or if he got really hysterical, he'd say, hey, do you want to take a moment? And he said one time he had to fire a guy, and the dude was crying. And I could tell this guy was pretty well disgusted by that. I had to fire a guy one time who was bawling his eyes out. That was awkward. So for those of you watching out there, have you ever had to fire someone? And have you ever been fired? How did it go? How did you handle it? You know, like I said, nobody wants to fire someone or be fired, but if people have the right attitude, it'll usually work out the best for both parties. Some of you might have co-workers who are slackers and deserve to be fired, but your management's afraid to let them go because they're thinking it's going to take too long to replace them. And that may be true, but it can be really bad for morale. I remember one time at an engineering company, it was an office gig, and I took over as a manager for this group of people, and had this guy that would sleep at his desk. I mean, we're not talking during the lunch break, just during working hours, he'd put his head on his desk and just be sound asleep. So I had a talk with him, and he kept doing it. So I called HR and said, I gotta fire this guy. Well, everybody knew this guy was a slacker before I took over. And I was shocked to find out there was nothing in his record to indicate his poor performance. And through a combination of factors, HR was nervous to fire him based on what I told him. So every week I had to sit this guy down with a witness and go through his performance, which included one or more episodes of sleeping in the previous week. All it was to generate a paper trail so I could fire the guy. Well, this dragged on for weeks, and then I ended up accepting a position with a different company. And it turns out this guy, instead of getting fired, they just basically fired him under the cover of a mass layoff. And you know, that's another technique companies use, is they'll use a layoff to get rid of a bunch of underperformers as cover, because people are so afraid of being sued for wrongful termination or termination based on some form of discrimination. It's easier to sweep them all up in the net of a layoff. Well, it wasn't long after I accepted this other position that I had to go to the client's job site, and they were wanting to do a certain thing in construction, and I had to present the technical merits to the owner's representative, who had to approve the plan. So I go up there, and who should it be but this guy that I tried to fire was sleeping on the job. Oh yeah, the funny thing about this guy, when I tried to point out you can't sleep on the job, he said he was quietly thinking about work, which to me is an all-time classic. So I thought, oh wow, this isn't gonna go well. This guy's gonna exact his revenge. It was just the opposite. This guy was so uncomfortable seeing me there that it was just yes, yes, yes to everything we proposed, and the meeting was over in about 5 minutes. He just wanted out of there. Going back to that guy who committed professional fraud, the whole time when I'm trying to convince my boss that he needed to be fired, the guy was back there trashing computer files to hide evidence of a bunch of other stuff that he had done inappropriately. So once that came to light, I was fully vindicated. Although I thought the first episode was outrageous and basis enough for firing the guy. You know, I've had to fire people who drove company vehicles without authorization repeatedly. There was a guy I wanted to fire for doing that, and they wouldn't fire him. And I said, okay, that's your call, but I will not accept any responsibility for what happens if you keep this guy. And it turned out after I left, this guy gets a DUI while leaving a casino in the company vehicle that he wasn't authorized to drive. So anyway, I'm pretty slow to fire people these days, just for a combination of circumstances. I really work hard to retain people and get them on the right path, but there's just sometimes that people are not a good fit. Sometimes too, people get competitive about trying to secure a job, and ironically they really don't want to work for you. It's like, why take the job? I had a guy quit after his 4-hour orientation period. Hadn't even done any real work. It's like, what? So, you know, you run into people that try and get hired for some short amount of time and quit, and then try and get on unemployment. There's that game. But anyway, that's my vlog for today on firing people or being fired. So again, I'm interested in what all experiences you might have had out there, so please let me know in the comments section. Thanks for watching, and please stay tuned for future videos.